morning. This is the Fat Health Teacher. I actually get to make this recording again, which means it should be smoother because my son, or I honestly don't know, hit the mute button on my device. And so even though I just did like a 10-minute thing, nothing came through. And here he comes again because he would like some more fruit leather. Alright, so the topic today is grief. And if you're not aware, because you're not a Facebook friend, then you probably don't know that my dog Apollo died yesterday. Now, Apollo was 17 years old. He had been with me for at least 10 years. And what I wanted to share first is kind of how he came to be with me, because it was not on purpose. When I was living in my apartment after my first divorce, I had a cat. And I had intended to only have a cat because that's all I had permission for. But then I had a friend who got into some trouble. It was a domestic violence situation. He was actually the target, which I know is unusual, but that woman was crazy. And she put him through a lot of stuff that he did not deserve to go through, at least from my perspective as his friend. So anyway, he ended up leaving town in order to try to get away from her. He left me with Apollo with the intent that once he was settled in his new place, then he would send for Apollo. Well, that didn't happen. He was settled, but the place he was in didn't accept dogs, and blah, 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 blah. He ended up finding a new partner, got married, came back to Albuquerque to work, but didn't want the dog because Apollo was very hairy, and he leaves hair everywhere. I seriously mean everywhere. So Apollo then officially became mine, which was kind of cool. I think I'd had Apollo for about a year before I met my second husband. And I don't know. So we moved into our house. We get a house with a huge backyard for Apollo. And we just kind of enjoyed life, at least for as long as we could. Apollo was doing really well until about 3 months ago. And then he started to go downhill, and I kind of justified what was happening with him because he was old. I didn't take him to the vet because he didn't appear to be in pain, and like I said, I was just attributing everything to him being old. I later discovered, or did research that leads me to believe that he was having a renal failure issue, so that would be with his kidneys. But everything that I read online said that treating him would be incredibly painful. It was talking about multiple IV boluses a week, as well as having to do a feeding tube if that was necessary, that kind of thing, and that maybe we could get another 2 years of his life. But he's always been a very independent dog. He liked being close, but not on top of you. He was not a cuddler, but he definitely enjoyed, he was lazy when it came to fetching ball. So you threw a ball, he would go get it, and then he would hide it. But he loves squeaky toys and that kind of thing. Anyway, he's a really good dog, and I really miss him. And it's only been a day, and his death was horrible. As I said, he wasn't initially in pain, but probably 2 days ago, he lay down and he wouldn't move. Or couldn't. I'm not sure what happened. And so I moved him onto the dog bed so he'd be more comfortable. I made sure he had water and food and that kind of stuff. And he didn't move. He was awake. He didn't seem to be in pain. And then the night before last, he actually woke up multiple times whining. And I knew that he was in pain at that point, and that the best thing I could do would be to euthanize him. But no one was available, and I didn't want to take him from where we were to an unknown place, to an unknown vet, to have him put down. Additionally, the cost was ridiculous, and I don't get paid for like another week. So this was also an issue, which made me very, very sad because I tried to find ways to do right by him, and I wasn't able to. But anyway, so yesterday morning I moved him out to the yard so that he can enjoy the sun and the birds and the breeze and all that good stuff. And I had him in the shade, and I had him with water, and I tried to tempt him with food or bones or that kind of thing. And by early afternoon he was gone. So my partner left work early. He he came home and he dug the hole and he buried Apollo. And, you know, life has to move on. But it got me thinking, what about the stages of grief, right? Because this is a pretty big change, right? I go from having 2 dogs to 1, and this comes on the heels of having to put down my cat, who was also very old. I actually didn't put her down. She walked outside, and she lay down under the tree, and then she was done. So, when do people go through grief? People go through grief anytime there's a huge, like, life-changing event. This could be the death of somebody, this could be moving, it could be a new job, it could be your parents are getting divorced, it can be something that you were really, really expecting and then it doesn't pan out. Death, of course, it can be coming to grips with your own addiction or the addiction of somebody that you care about. It can be coming to grips with the fact that you are in an abusive relationship, which, believe it or not, some people don't realize until significantly later. I haven't talked about it yet, but abusers tend to not start abusing immediately. So you get into a relationship with a person and you think things are okay, and then gradually, as they become more comfortable with you, they begin to mistreat you. And it can escalate from there. The first one is from a website called Passer, which appears to be an end-of-life management. So they're not talking about, sudden death or anything like that. This is more about that death that you've been expecting because somebody is old, or you've seen that they're going downhill for a while, or they have that diagnosis of cancer or whatever it is, and you know that there's no way they're going to come back from it. So on this chart, you see 5 stages: denial, shock, anger, guilt, bargaining, sadness, acceptance. This is pretty accurate, at least from my own personal experience. When I first found out that my niece was diagnosed with a brain tumor, I absolutely went through a lot of these. I know that my sister was going through them as well. And it was really, really hard. And I don't know if she has fully adopted acceptance, but I will say that there are times where I'm listening to something or I'm reminded of something, and it pops me back down into that sadness step again before I'm able to, crawl back up to acceptance and kind of say, okay, that it really sucked that this is what happened to her, but it's time to move on. The best way you can do is kind of honor her, right? So as you're looking through this, I think that it's a pretty simple, easy to explain thing. The bargaining thing I can definitely see. So with Apollo, as I said, I saw his death coming because he was 17. And when he finally passed, I definitely had a lot of guilt as far as not getting him euthanized. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to him. I didn't take him on enough walks. Stuff like that. But I know that he had a good life. I know that he enjoyed being part of the family. I definitely had the sadness, and I'm working on acceptance. I'm not quite there yet, but it's a process. And I ask that if you are supporting somebody who's going through the stages of grief, that you recognize they're not going to go through them step by step and just move on. There's going to be some backsliding. There's going to be some, I wish this hadn't happened. And it could seem random for you, but just reminders of things or, basically the person has a reminder of something, and it can become a very, very overwhelming sensation. Okay, so the second diagram that I want to share with you is actually from the yourimpoweredself.com. And this one I picked because it goes over the 5 stages of grief with regard to divorce. Remember, grief does not have to be about somebody dying or something dying. It could just be that there's a major life-changing event. Okay? So I picked this one not only because it was about divorce, but also because it differentiates between the perspective of the person who's doing the divorcing, so the person who's asked for the divorce, versus the person who is on the receiving end of it. And I definitely, reflecting on my own second marriage, saw quite a lot of this. The shock, denial, and disbelief, the low self-esteem, the attempts to save the marriage at any cost. Uh, but what's interesting, and one of the things that I had to come to terms with, because my second divorce was not a simple thing, I actually had multiple things to grieve. So I had to grieve the loss of potential, so all the things that we had planned on doing together, um, that we had promised to do together, that we were not going to do. Coming to terms with the fact that he is an addict, coming to terms with the fact that it was an abusive relationship, and then, of course, coming to terms with the fact that this relationship that I'd had for 7 years, going on 8, I think, was gone. And that even though I'd spent all that time on that relationship, I needed to walk away for my own sanity and for the safety of my son. So this was a very difficult thing, and as I said, multiple things for which I needed to grieve. So you'll see again denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Take a look at it. I think you'll find that for the most part it's pretty accurate. At least for me it is. I still sometimes see this. One of the things that Bob will do is when he gets a large sum of money. So this happened when he lost his mother, and again when he lost his dad. He kind of went back to the anger stage. And he would threaten, and he would say that he was going to take me to court, that he was going to bankrupt me, that he was going to get my son taken away, things along those lines. And then he would try to bargain, and then he would go through a depression phase. And I don't know that he's ever hit acceptance, to be honest. I don't. And I don't know how much of that is because of the drugs that he is choosing to use, or if it's something else, but I can definitely see this pattern with him. Okay, the last one I want to talk with you about is actually the 7 stages of grief that is given, that was done at by the socialworktech.com. So this one is 7, and if you look at it, you'll notice that rather than the standard 5 from the Kubler-Ross model, it's a little bit expanded, and some of the things are kind of muddled. So instead of anger and bargaining being 2 separate things, you had them combined, and then you have pain and guilt. So instead of it being anger and guilt, it's actually pain and guilt, and then anger and bargaining. I think this one's a little bit more thorough. And the other thing I like about this one is that it talks about loss in general. It doesn't talk about just somebody dying. Okay? And I think that's really important. We even see this with our students. The loss of a pet, the loss of a favorite teacher, the loss of a boyfriend or girlfriend, the loss of a stable home environment. It can be a lot of things. And so what I want to move into now, again, I think that this one is worth looking at. But what I want to move into now is if you are supporting a person who is grieving something, please do not one-up them. It may be your intent to let them know that things aren't as bad as they feel, but one of the things that you can do when you are doing that, by letting them know that there are things that are worse out there, is basically you are diminishing what they're feeling. You're telling them that they shouldn't feel the way they feel because other people have it worse. And it's a pretty slippery slope here. Because if you tell them, well, other people have it worse, I don't understand why you feel so bad, then you start making them think, maybe my reaction's not legitimate. Maybe I'm not supposed to be feeling like this. And then you get like this repression. And I've seen this with my students, I've done it myself, where the person's repressing and they're trying to move on and they're trying to do what everybody's telling them they should be doing as in response to what has happened. And it can be very challenging. And one of the things that can happen is the person can choose to start self-medicating, which can be drugs, alcohol, exercise. It can be binging, it can be anorexia or bulimic behaviors, any of those. We know that high stress levels, which can result when a person is unable to process grief in healthy ways, that it can cause stomach issues, it can cause chest pain, increased heart rates, can cause heart attacks, increased weight, decreased weight, depending on how the person handles it, muscle spasms, tics. I had a friend, when her parents separated, the mother actually developed a tic, and it was really bad. And even though the child did not want the father to come home, she knew that the only way that the mother would be able to get past this was to reconcile their marriage, at least at that point. Um, so long-term or increased high stress levels can also increase infertility, psoriasis, eczema. Um, yeah, it's unpleasant. So we got to work on positive stress management techniques. This is something that I'm going to focus on in future videos. Anyway, that's about it. Be patient. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with people who are grieving. I've been very lucky. I've got some friends who are extraordinarily patient. My current partner is also amazing, and I am very lucky to have him. And together we are working to help Odin through the grieving process. He's currently grieving his father being unavailable due to bad choices. He is grieving Apollo no longer being there. In fact, he told us a couple of times last night, and he told me again this morning, that he thinks that Apollo died because he threw dirt clods at him. And he did, but that was not why Apollo died. And so we've been having to work with him on that. Anyway, be calm, be healthy, and I will possibly see you all tomorrow. Thank you.